If I could ask Allison to maybe start with panel, will introduce themselves and then we'll go into the questions. Allison.
I'm not energy related. I work with Skills Development Scotland. I'm the regional planning lead or skills planning lead for Aberdeen City and Shire. We have a remit at the moment to help support the development of the future workforce, so getting an understanding of what those skills requirements are going to be in the future and supporting people to undertake training opportunities and develop themselves and their workforce. And I'll pass over to Paul.
I think I've done that bit. So very true.
So my name is Daniel Bryan. I am Head of Data and Digital for OEUK, which is the trade association for the offshore energy industries.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is David Ferguson and I represent Scotland Is. We are the digital trade body, or the trade body for the digital trade sector in Scotland. We are also a cluster management organisation and we manage the cyber and data clusters. I specifically manage the cyber cluster and the data cluster, and I'm keen to be here to look at how we engage with the tech sector to develop skills and create opportunities for collaboration across the tech sector.
Good afternoon, my name is Leeuw Brady. I am the Energy Transition Director for Worley in Aberdeen. And currently, this is close to my heart because I'm looking at how we take what would be traditionally classed as our oil and gas, Tier 1 EPC deliverables and capabilities and transitioning them into the energy transition in a lot of what we're going to talk about today with the transferable skill set that we currently have in Aberdeen. So this is it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Thank you. So I suppose just to start, Paul's presentation going from 160,000 to 200,000 in the next 9 years, the time it takes for some of those skills to transfer. I mean, Neil, just to carry on with yourself then, if I may, how does that resonate as a company that's engaged in the oil and gas and in the wider energy sector? How do you actually see that evolving over that sort of same time period?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of words I would use initially, and one is exciting. It's an exciting time. Another one is it's reassuring. And I say that because we have seen a downturn in oil and gas at the moment, and it's almost become sort of a bad word. And I think with some of the recent developments, what we've realised is that it's not going away. Yes, it's going to be decreasing, but it's not going away anytime soon, which gives comfort to people that currently are in the industry, because it means if they want to see out their careers in that they can. But also with the emerging energies and the renewable piece, it means that anybody that's currently in oil and gas that's thinking, I want to change, they can also do that. And I think there's a great opportunity as well from the digital aspect of things to really entice people that perhaps didn't even think that oil and gas or energy industry was an opportunity for them to work in. It's an opportunity to entice them from other industries into that. In terms of some of the challenges that we face as a direct employer of this, there's an onus on us to upskill our people. And that's an upskilling piece, both education internally, but also, really pushing the forefront of taking all of the experience that we've had currently in traditional energy and doing exactly what we're going to talk about today, which is transferring that into the emerging energies. I mean, we look at some of the numbers that have been thrown about 100,000 extra people potentially in emerging energies over the next 8 years. That's not going to happen by accident, and it's certainly not going to happen by just trying to attract new people to the industry. So this transferability of skills and the recognition that we have the skills to be transferred, for me, is hugely important if we want to be successful and reach our targets as they currently stand.
Thanks, and maybe open that question up maybe to David and Daniel as well, because you obviously sit more in that kind of trade body across the sectors. And again, I don't know how your perspectives are of how you see that transition happening and how manageable that transition is.
Well, I think you can speak to the digital aspect of skills a little bit later on, but I think in terms of how the industry is transforming and changing, And if you thought back to the 1970s and 80s when I was a small boy in short trousers, there was a very small number of very influential players working in the offshore oil and gas sector in the UK. Today, we have a huge variety of and much more diverse range of stakeholders who are all active in the offshore sector. And as we move, as Paul was alluding, from a business which is quite high margin in terms of oil and gas, to businesses which are somewhat lower margin in terms of renewables, wind, those sorts of things. I think that's driving a greater opportunity and desire for collaboration across those who are working, because we need to get more done with less. And the best way to do that is to figure out how we can work together to address these common challenges. And then that leads to greater collaboration on things like skills, development, training, all of the things that we'll be talking about this afternoon. So I'm very positive that the huge amount of change that we're going through at the moment will actually leave us in a better and stronger place as an offshore energy sector.
See, I'd very much agree with what you've said there insofar as the opportunity. I think Scotland and the UK finds itself in, as the rest of the world does, in a period of change. But I think that Scotland in particular is in a great opportunity. We have a great opportunity here. We have a sector which has been a huge sector within Scotland, the oil and gas sector. We see globally that sector is reducing, but geographically we're in the fortunate position of having an energy alternative to be able to pivot across into. And I think this is really important for Scotland. We should see this as a huge opportunity for the nation to be a world leader. So we get in early, we develop the opportunity that is there, and we're not only going to create jobs within Scotland, but we're going to create jobs which are going to be exportable globally, because we will become world leaders in the delivery of this type of offshore energy. And it's a real opportunity for us to do that. Now, within it, absolutely, there's going to be huge challenges, and some of those challenges will be painful in certain sectors, but there will be the creation of new sectors, which will create new opportunities for employment. And I think that the adoption of technology within those sectors is going to be significant in bringing value and efficiency to those sectors. And absolutely, that will require collaboration across not just the vertical of energy, but across multiple sectors, so that we can pull on that skills base and, by pulling together the data, optimise the value that is there and make Scotland and the energy sector as efficient as it possibly can.
No, I think that's a fair point. And Allison, then, on the back of that, obviously Skills Development Scotland's role is to work across the whole curriculum, so not just upskilling and reskilling at one end, it's also you're involved in schools and that curriculum development. I mean, how then does that challenge relate to that kind of bringing young people in and bringing people into that sector and developing those skills?
It's quite an exciting time at the moment, and I think we shouldn't be frightened of using this word as an opportunity to bring our young people forward. I'm going to come back to that because it's not just bringing our young people forward, but bear with me for the moment. I think one of the things we have to be very careful about is the narrative we have when we get in and work with young people in schools. It really is up to the sector and the industry to go in and emphasise to these young people the opportunities that are available in both the oil and gas and the wider energy sector, because when you speak to young people these days, they're quite often saying there isn't an opportunity in oil and gas. It's a dying industry, and we all know that that's not true. The skills and knowledge that are available in the oil and gas can be taken on into other energy sectors, and I think it's really important, seeing the drive towards renewable energies, that we make sure that the talent pipeline coming through is aware of those opportunities. Following on from the impacts of Brexit and COVID and the war in Ukraine and all the other things, we're actually seeing at the moment, especially up in the northeast, but right across Scotland, we actually have a labour market issue as well as a skills issue. So I think as well you have to be very careful when you're trying to recruit that future talent, that you're listening to what they want, selling your industry as somewhere attractive to work, and that might be a little bit of a challenge. I mean, young people are far more aware of the green issues going forward and might want to get more involved in the green energy side of things. But you also have young people nowadays are saying that they want to work in a different way. People are wanting to work from home. We're coming to speak about digital in a moment, but when you're working digitally, you can work remotely. I could be living in the south of France and working here. We also have to think about the working practices of these young people. Also have to think about the variety of people that we can support into the sector or bring into the sector, so young and older workforce. I mean, thinking about the people that are maybe more digitally enabled or that, you've got your neurodivergent workforce as an opportunity to bring more women into the sector. I think we have to look wider and widen our talent pool, but also be aware that you are going to be fighting for that labour with other sectors that also want to recruit people and also might have quite an attractive package going forward. So I guess my overall message from that is the industry really has a job to do here to show young people that there is an opportunity to have an attractive career and progression within the energy sector.
Thanks. And Paul, I mean, I suppose you, with your RGU hat on, I mean, you must see that with the students coming through in the both in terms of demand for certain courses, but also in terms of the ambition that we see some of the students having in terms of what they're coming in and that sort of enthusiasm to get involved in some of these courses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We see a whole range, but I mean, there's something quite overarching. I mean, every generation is part of that journey. If you think about it, I mean, the energy industry, not just oil and gas, but the energy industry is probably going to be one of the biggest industries in the world as we kind of get the world ready for a kind of an status in the 1.5 degree kind of what we need to do for a climate emergency. So actually being part of that journey, being part of actually making a real contribution, practice it in the UK, take that capability overseas to other areas, it's hugely attractive to people. So you see a huge amount of new courses coming in, both short courses as well as new programs coming in where we focus on solar, we focus on wind, we focus on the energy transition, energy systems, energy storage, really helping people to saying is actually we want to be part of the world. And actually when you speak to students, you speak to people coming in, actually that is a huge attraction to people actually to do that. So I think it is, we need to start thinking about what do we need for the world, how do we tell the story of to be part of that success story and actually create a world where you can actually do something at a scale you can't do in many other industries. We should be mightily proud of what story we have, how we tell it and what we can do.
And on that basis, I mean, Neil, you as working for an employer ultimately, what sort of challenge are you seeing then in terms of trying to recruit directly into?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of competition. That's just the truth of it. And interestingly, what I've seen over the last sort of 5-6 years as we've seen that downturn because of various aspects, is that it's not renewables that we're competing with. It's rail, it's construction, it's nuclear, it's military. And all of these, I guess if you go back 5-10 years, the oil and gas, everybody wanted to work in oil and gas. We're so well paid, you know. But that's just simply not true anymore. I'm not saying we're not well paid, don't get me wrong, but what we've seen is other industries catch up with terms and conditions that are as good, if not better. And that's a real challenge in terms of how do we counter that? How do we get people in a position whereby they want to come and work within the energy industry because they want to come and work within the energy industry? How do we sell it as being innovative and digitally focused and new and improved? But it's a real challenge. Resources are across the globe, in my opinion, the number one challenge right now. Everybody is vying for the same pool.
Can I come in on that one?
Please.
So, and I'll be slightly, go with me on this, but sometimes it feels like we talk about the oil and gas industry as some kind of prison. Then once you're in it, that's you for life and there's no escape. And you're tarred with that brush. And if your job disappears in one of the downturns, that's the end. And it's not.
Correct.
That isn't how it is. I mean, I'm looking at my daughters and my family. They live in a world where the expectation for doing one job is 2-3 years, perhaps not much more than that, in terms of the natural cycle of how people move in and move out of an industry. I left BP about 6 years ago as part of one of the downturns, moved down south, and now I ended up working where I am today. When I left BP, I found that the skills and the training that I'd received in that organisation set me in really good stead in terms of the level of management and other education I got in order to be very competitive in terms of moving into other jobs. So in terms of how we recruit and how we retain in our industry, the one element of that is being clear that people will leave, but they'll leave with opportunities, with the chance to go to another sector. They'll leave with skills that are transferable, and there's questions about how do we manage that transferability in terms of things like skills passport and so on. But they'll leave with a future, with prospects.
Agreed.
And then that will then perhaps enable them to spread the word and then come back later on to discover what they're missing once they've left the offshore energy industry.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and I think Allison touched on it earlier, I was telling Paul earlier, we recently won a piece of work that was out with the norm for our Aberdeen office. So it was working and designing some laboratories for a battery manufacturing plant. So really good in terms of that kind of new energy piece. And when we went to look at the piece of work and estimate it, the initial reaction from the team was, oh, we can't do this. Well, why not? It's not an offshore installation. And you're like, well, wait a minute though, it's pipes, it's instruments, and it's electrical cable. So what's the difference, guys? So it went from, we can't do this, to, well, let's have a look at it, to, this is actually quite cool, to, let's get after this. And it was amazing over the course of sort of 3 or 4 weeks as we went across that journey, the difference in, I guess, their view of their own skill set. And part of it for me is it's about all aspects, from the young to the old. It's about, as leaders, encouraging them that you'll find, guys, that your base skill set is very, very similar across the industries. All that's different is the environment and the application that you've been brought up in. But you can equally transfer very easily. I think Paul said 2 to 10 weeks.
Can I just come in on that as well? Because it's really interesting to hear you speak about this transferability between different jobs and different sectors. And I think that's something we actually have to highlight with the young people. I'm saying young people, but it could be anybody that's moving into it going forward. The fact you say they're likely to stay in a job for 3 years perhaps, and most people will have at least 6 different careers in their lifetime. Probably more. I've probably had 6 myself, and I'm from a much older generation. So it is important to let them understand those basic skills are the important ones. But the ability and the drive to keep learning is equally important, because things are moving rapidly. We also don't want to scare them by saying things are moving too rapidly. I mean, our young people today are used to that rapid rate of change. They just don't recognise it as a rate of change because it's what they're used to living through. And I think we also have to recognise, and this was something we had in a discussion earlier on, that when you start to bring young people into an organisation, they have a lot to teach us.
Yeah.
I was facing the front, so I don't know how many of you are still going to be working in another 8 years' time. As I said, I'm on a beach somewhere in the Caribbean. But the people that we're bringing in have a skill set that I am completely unaware of at the moment, and I have no intention of learning, but they can bring it in and help drive forward this change for us. So it's a two-way learning process. We help develop them, and they bring their new way of thinking and working to us.
Just to add to it, I mean, just listening, I mean, this is about, there's no jobs for life, but there's skills for life, right? So we need to get the skills right. And I hear the thing, and you can see it in this region as well, unemployment is low, demand is high. We never had more people in the world than we have now, right? So there's not an issue that we have enough people. We might not be working in the way we currently work. We might learn a lot from the COVID-19 situation about remote working. We might actually saying is the new energy structure looks very different. A lot of the work doesn't happen in the same location where energy is generated. In our world, in our future, energy has become localized. Energy becomes regional. So, I mean, wind is local, solar is local, storage is local. So we see a very different energy future, a very different way where the jobs is going to be. We see jobs disconnected from where people necessarily where the action is. So there's a disconnection between execution of work and where people physically going to be. I'm sure, Neil, that happens already in your world. We need that kind of new ways of working, new ways of thinking, people who have generic skills who can work for a supermarket on one day and then do data analytics on an energy company the other day. We need to completely start thinking about how we structure our work. When we look at our jobs, you can be in HR in any organization. The things are very similar. Finance is very similar. Procurement is very similar. There will be some jobs unique to the sector, but they're getting fewer and fewer. And most of that actually will be also kind of transferred to other areas. Because as I said to you, is when you look at wind and you look at solar, that is manufacturing energy generation capacity. This is not the traditional jobs we have in the industry. So it's going to be very different workforce with a very different skill. This is going to be super cool. If we get it right, a super cool thing to work on, because you can work on anywhere in the world from anywhere on projects which is a skill base which is actually highly transferable. So I'm pretty positive. Maybe I have to have too many happy pills, but I'm pretty positive.
I think you're right. And I think, you know, the silver lining, if there's any, to the COVID crisis is that it's accelerated our ability to work remotely and globally, probably by 10 years, certainly in our industry. It's phenomenal when you see the level of collaboration that you get now compared to pre-COVID. The ability to pull people from all over the world, globally, right person for the right job at the right time to work on a solution for your customer, which you did before, but you might have thought of flying someone across before for a meeting, or there would have been a completely different approach. It certainly wouldn't have been project teams in different countries and different time zones all working together with a common goal. That for me has been phenomenal.
And so maybe Daniel, to come back to the point you were making, I think you're absolutely right. The energy sector is a massive open door, and I think the skills that you learn from within the energy sector stand you so much more in terms of the other sectors you can go into, and as an education, it's a brilliant place. But I suppose the challenge, and if we look specifically at digital skills, and it's kind of what you alluded to, how does the energy sector then make itself attractive? Because there is so much competition for those kind of digital skill sets. And the example I would use is of a university whose third-year cybersecurity students all had job offers for the end of their fourth year. So employers are getting into universities early to secure talent. So how does the energy sector in particular deal with that?
That is a huge challenge for every sector, I think, as well as the energy sector. And I think there's some Skills Development Scotland numbers suggested. I think there was about 6,000 graduates in computer science in the last year, and there's about 13,000 job openings for them. So that's more than 2-to-1 disparity in terms of the demand for people with computer science qualifications and the supply of those people from universities in Scotland. So clearly there's challenges in terms of the ability to attract those people that we need into our sector. I think there's challenges overall in terms of the structure and approach we take to building the digital skills we need in the sector as well, and how we think about that. And if you look at I think, Paul, the point you made in your talk was that digitalisation and digital is absolutely everywhere. As part of some work that Skills Development Scotland is involved in, they're looking at the broader digital economy skills needs within Scotland. And that piece of work is looking across everything from energy, the drinks industry in Scotland, through to local government. And one of the examples that comes from that is the people who drive the bin lorries in Glasgow need digital competence, because in the cabs of the bin lorries, they have a little device they have to push every time they go over a pothole, so they can record the location of the pothole and so on. So it may not sound terribly complicated, but there's similar analogies offshore in terms of entering in kind of meter readings numbers, in terms of interfaces that are well designed, are easy to use with gloves, a hard hat, spectacles, getting the human factors right in these situations so that they are attractive to people for whom, frankly, digital may not be something of any interest at all, may leave them cold, versus those who are absolutely passionate and really, really excited about how they go forwards.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you there because I get on my soapbox, please. Shutting me up is going to be the hard thing at the end here. But what you're saying about the digital skills and the digital literacy, so I think we have to maybe separate out the two. Digital literacy is going to be vitally important across the board. And we discussed earlier that we cannot assume that our young people coming through school and university are necessarily digitally literate. They probably are at university level, but maybe not at school, just because they're going through school. We have a huge challenge in schools at the moment with computing teaching and a lack of teachers across quite a few schools. So we have a move at the moment to try and increase the number of computing teachers, but we also have to think about getting digital skills embedded across the curriculum to make sure that young people are coming through with an understanding of what digital can do for them. But if you're thinking about digital skills with cybersecurity, software development, all these things, those are particular skill sets that people are obviously going to have to go to university to learn. And I think trying to give people, again, a clearer understanding of what those roles are likely to be, how they can get into them, the fact that they don't necessarily need to take computing to start. I was told that you take maths at school, that's probably going to help you more at university if you want to do, I'm probably not selling it, I'm a maths geek, I like a number. But I mean, if you take maths at school, that's probably going to serve you better if you're going into software development than taking a higher in computing. I don't know if that's true, this is what I've been told. But there are different routes into these various different jobs, and I think it's important that people understand there are different pathways in and different pathways once you get in there. Very, very important. But yes, separate out digital literacy from digital tech skills or digital professions.
And I think it's very interesting, actually, and I'm going back in time here to my first university experience, which was in IT. And just listening to everybody talking about it, when I left university with my qualification, pretty much, I'm pretty certain every single person on that course was interviewed by the same 4 companies: Marconi, IBM, Logica, and EDS at the time. At no point did anybody even think about the energy industry. Perversely, I ended up working for Logica in Shell, so I ended up working in the energy industry, in digital. But I would never have considered, because it was never talked about as an option to get into the energy industry from a digital point of view. So I guess the question becomes is, what can we do to educate people more of the opportunities that are available in our sector?
It feels like it's building that environment in which digital is accepted and it's nurtured and it's supported to the level that's needed for the roles and the ambitions of the people that are there. So I mean, for those people who need a basic digital fluency, either to enter meter readings offshore or to drive a Teams call or whatever it may be, to drive a finance application, there's a level of support and training that's needed there. If you have the core deep domain digital role, so you need to learn anything from coding through to Power BI analytics, whatever it may be, there's a huge amount of support out there in terms of online courses, training. I think for that group of people, the way forward is relatively clear, and there's a lot of support out there in terms of career ladders, all the organisations out there to support you. I think the area where we really perhaps struggle a little bit is the question of digital strategy, leadership within an organisation, particularly organisations on the smaller side where you can't stand up a team of 30 people to think about what is the digital strategy of my organisation. That might be your chief executive and somebody else to go and work that through. The level of support that you need in order to be able to come up with an effective digital strategy, that works for an SME, where the leadership of that SME is perhaps, frankly, not that interested in it, but still sees it as a core aspect of how to remain competitive, how to be successful in bids, tenders, whatever it may be. I think that's an area where there's still a significant challenge. And I think ETZ is putting a lot of work into that in terms of supporting the SME sector to try and understand exactly what's required there and how to move that area forward. So there's a lot of work to do here. The Digital Economy Skills Action Plan work will help to provide the evidence base around, I think, digital fluidity and the kind of interventions that are needed there. Similar, I think, in terms of the strategic aspects within the SME community. But I think it's important, I would say this as a data guy, we're kind of driven by the data, we're driven by the facts on the grounds in terms of how we do try and move this forwards so we can get that support right in a way that is effective for the groups that need it.
Can I make a quick observation, if it's all right? We speak as if we have a choice, and I don't think we do, right? So if we don't have it here in the UK or in Scotland, we're going to get it from somewhere else and it will be outsourced. Because the rest of the world doesn't stand still. I mean, I had the pleasure of being in the Middle East 4 weeks ago. I was blown away by kind of the money going into these capabilities and skills. And again, you know, our competition isn't within 50 miles of each other, other companies. The competition is the world at the moment. So unless we actually take the kind of responsibility, this is part of our strategic agenda, strategic capability in our organizations, we are not going to have it here. We're going to buy it in from other places. And that would be a real shame because actually, again, conferences like this are enablers to make this happen.
No, I think we ran a data and digital maturity survey in 2020. We're going to run another one of those this year to see how we're doing. One of the stats that came from that was 21% of organisations had trained less than a third of their people on digital training in the last year. So 4/5 of organisations hadn't given digital training to the vast majority of their workforce in a single year. So that doesn't sound right in terms of how we would be nurturing a competent digital workforce that will compete globally for the work that's out there.
I think that's absolutely right insofar as the speed of technology. I think the speed of technology is fundamentally changing the way we have to look at education across a lifetime, and education once you are in the employment sector, where traditionally, because technology perhaps moved at a slower pace, individuals could look to enter a trade, so they complete their training, continue in that trade, have a job for life and retire out at the end. But we're seeing technology move so quickly that industries are changing. And I think organisations need to recognise that and see that education shouldn't just stop when people leave university and move into employment, it has to be part of the work-life balance, has to include improvements and changes in education. And that will lead to other sectors will pivot as well. They will change. And unless we continue to train and develop the workforce, even up to the level of executive level, they need to understand what's happening within technologies so that they can provide the correct strategies for those organisations and be able to help them to maximise value. So it's a fundamental change in the way that we look at education. The ability to then pivot within a sector, to be able to pivot skills, take that digital literacy and be able to develop into lots of different opportunities in different sectors within an individual's lifespan within the working environment.
I think you see that. You see that in the nature of the qualifications that people are getting now. Once upon a time, as you say, you get to university for a few years, that would be you. You'd be set more or less in terms of your basic education. I mean, if you look at LinkedIn now, you see every day somebody is posting a small credential they've got in terms of competence on a database technology or competence in marketing or sustainability, whatever it may be. And that links through again to the point you make, Paul, that this is for us to think about as individuals, perhaps less so than for organisations to do for us. We need to be in control of our own education, our own qualifications, and our own credibility to our next employer, as well as to our current employer, in terms of how we show up and how we can transfer our credentials and our capabilities in a way that makes sense to the next employer as well. And that transferability of skills and credentials, I think, is key to how we keep that door to the energy industry, and working both ways in terms of welcoming people in, then ultimately welcoming them hopefully back in a little bit later on.
I think that opportunity, sorry Alison, I think that opportunity for employers to offer individuals enhancement, so to offer the ability to improve their skills whilst in a particular employment, may be one of those hooks that enables enticement into that sector. Because if it's that ability for an individual to advance themselves may be one of the drivers to attract people in.
Totally agree with everything you're saying there, and it's probably slightly off track here, but just thinking about what you were saying about the LinkedIn and posting the micro-credentials and the things people have gained, I think there's also the opportunity for digitally enabled learning, which is a different discussion, but there is so much out there, and we also have to be careful that we're using the right learning that has been quality checked and is doing the right thing. But that's a discussion for another day about other than digital
It's interesting
skills.
that that's been said there, because as an employer, we're investing a huge amount of time, effort, and money in a new e-learning system. Basics of that is that we want to be able to upskill our workforce when they do transfer into other areas of the business. 6 sectors, if you like, that we work in. We have 6 sectors that we work in. And this new e-learning system that is designed to allow individuals who want to move a sector to get that basic skill set, so that when people are talking the language of that industry, they've got an understanding of it. But of course, it doesn't replace that on-the-job learning that is an absolute must to get the skill sets up. But I think that by investing in this e-learning system, it's showing the workforce that, hey, we take this seriously. We want to invest in you. We want to invest in our company and make sure that everybody's as armed as possible when it comes to moving about.
And then there's that mindset from the people in the workforce, and I'm assuming your workforce is quite driven anyway, but the ones that are coming through, certainly when I first left school, I thought that's last exam, great, don't have to think about it anymore, no more learning, but that's not the way the culture is. No. And it certainly wasn't for my career, but I think we have to drive that desire to continue learning in our whole pipeline of talent as they're coming through.
Agreed, and going back to that example I spoke about there with the battery manufacturing, it's, as leaders, we need to encourage people to get out of the comfort zone and to realise that it is possible for you to go and learn something just a little bit different, but the same.
So, and I think what becomes really interesting, and perhaps, David, coming back to you and the role Scotland IS have with actually helping shape that future technology and the pace of technology, and I'm thinking in particular that it was announced recently that Aberdeen would have one of the 5G hubs. The test and innovation hubs would be based in Aberdeen. How do we then help manage, or what's needed to drive that strategy so that as technology evolves at a pace, and I think the last 2 years have shown us that an organisation's ability to adopt to technology and adapt to technology and utilise it is there, the capacity is there. From your perspective and looking across other sectors as well as the energy sector, what challenge does that new technology and that pace of new technology bring in terms of the kind of skills, the upskilling, the reskilling and those future skills?
I think without a doubt it brings challenges, but I think there's two aspects to the uptake and the development of new technologies. And I think the first part is that the technology will be developed by technology companies, and they will not necessarily develop that technology initially with a specific sector in mind. They will be developing the technology. Once the technology starts to come to fruition, then opportunities appear within sectors. But what we see within those technology companies is that they have partially a responsibility to make their technology as adoptable as possible. So they lead the technology advancement, but they also lead the interface between that technology and the users of that technology. And I think this is where it comes back to the levels of digital skills within a particular sector. They don't necessarily have to have digital skills that are up at the cutting edge of technology, because the technology organisations will develop the technology, create the interface, and that interface will then be used by the end users who don't have to properly understand the technology. They have to bring their digital skills to the application of that.
The enablement.
The enablement, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, yeah. And I think that's two different, so there's two different aspects to how technology will advance and how it will be adopted within the sectors. And the technology companies will be driven, they're obviously driven commercially as well. They have to have the best interface, because the best interface is what's going to be taken up by industry.
Agreed, and I had a conversation earlier about this, a similar thing, and it's about the best and the simplest.
Yes.
Technology is fantastic until it's not.
Yeah.
It's brilliant until it goes wrong. And then, of course, when it goes wrong, you need to have a deeper level of digital skills in order to fix it, which isn't always possible if you're on site or you're in situ. So it's the key thing for me is keeping it as simple as possible so that it's enabled for everyone to use.
Yes, yeah. And I think that creates opportunities for individuals then moving across sectors, because they're able to use different applications. It also makes it easier for the employer, because you're not having to bring in individuals who are very technical, because that in essence will probably be an outsourced service that will be provided. And it's about bringing in third parties who can provide the technology at a level that the current workforce can use or upskill to. So it makes it easier, it opens up the employment market, and you're not having to employ these digital and technical experts to the same extent.
And there's a certain aspect as well. There's a piece here as a company that we look at these things and they are developed with an application in mind, but may have a suite of applications that they can be used for. So it's up to us to be innovative in terms of how we take that technology and use it for our customers. And we're seeing that at the moment, certainly in Connected Worker, for example. The use of headsets. During COVID, we utilised those to do boots on the ground safety tours offshore, because we couldn't fly, we couldn't get offshore, but we didn't want to drop our standards. And to see it happening real time was hugely motivational.
Can I come in on the 5G question? And I think it is fabulous that there will be a 5G hub in Aberdeen, but the question of how to make the best use of that, but my simple answer to that is we need to be organised. So it's in order to make use of any innovative opportunity of talking to Steve at Intelligent Plant about this at lunchtime, you need that combination of people with bright ideas. You need the finance people, you need the legal people, you even need some marketing people in the room. terms of how it's done. But you need the right combination of talents organised in a way that enables opportunities and innovation to take place. Opportunity Northeast does a fabulous job of innovation, part of the innovation hub at the centre in the centre of Aberdeen. There's lots of ways we can do this, but we need to be organised as a city and as a region in order to make use of the facility when it comes. Because otherwise, we're going to not capitalise on the opportunities of it.
Can I make a point on this one? Just adding in, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I answered other questions. Far more fun.
It's never stopped you before.
I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I just we've done quite a lot of work on looking at companies, right? And we asked this, how much time do you as individuals actually spend training a year, right? And it's quite an interesting question because what we find is depending on you're the operator or the supply chain organizations, most people, if you're generous, somewhere between 3 and 5 days training a year, unless you're an apprentice or a grad, you spend maybe a bit more. I think it's totally unacceptable. We need to find ourselves in a world where actually this becomes a core part of your job, right? I know people talk about continuous training or other bits and pieces. You need to carve out far more time to get ready for these digital technologies, whatever it is, 5G, well, I don't mind what it is, because actually we need to be better. It's moving so fast. We see some of our degrees, it's a 4-year degree. By the time you finish university, what you learned in the first year is already out of date. So start thinking about the shift, how fast this happens. So the learning, the micro-credentials people are talking about, stuff that Daniel's talking about, absolutely right. But this is back to individual responsibility around this. How can you carve out enough time to actually realize, are you going to be a user of technology, a user of the digital tools? Can you use them in the most effective way? Or are you going to be the super user, which is a completely different training, right? But if I just put you on the spot, and I'm sure all of us use the Microsoft products, I mean, how much of Microsoft can you really use? 5%, 10%, 50%? It's quite an interesting question. And that's a tool we've been using for 20 odd years. Quite interesting when you start thinking about how do we do it on the newer technologies. I'll leave it to my colleagues who have far better wisdom to figure out how to do that.
But I'm just going to come back to the point that was asked earlier in terms of how do we attract and how do we retain skilled people in the sector in Aberdeen? I mean, if you look at look at who we have here today, we have representatives from some fabulous international universities that provide the innovation, fresh thinking and fresh people, fresh talent in order to move us forwards. We have a hugely supportive industry environment in terms of innovation. We have Opportunity Northeast, we have ETZ, we have a wide variety of organisations which are absolutely committed to driving innovation, driving new ideas and growth in the sector. And we have some very well established, really quite well resourced industries which should have some innovation capital available in order to be able to move these things forward. So if we can manage all of that together, and we have things like 5G Hub in there as well to add a bit of extra to that. So we have a great opportunity in order to bring people to this sector and to develop and educate and keep them and have them be...
Yeah. Sorry, I agree with what you're saying there. And I think it was Neil perhaps at the beginning had mentioned companies collaborating together as well in order to upskill. I think it was you, I'm blaming you. Upskilling and reskilling staff, and that as well as music to my ears, because there's no point in us reinventing the wheel to train one company, for the same thing as something else. The more we start to work together to upskill the workforce, the better. That might have a competition element to it there, but that's a conversation for another day as well.
That's hugely challenging. Yeah. That cross-competency recognition, if you like, and it's taken a long time for the oil and gas industry to get to that point, and hopefully all of the lessons learned over the last few years achieving that will drive us forward across industry when it comes to that kind of emerging energies piece, so that, a technician that has spent 10 years in oil and gas gets recognised for the level of competence and assurance that he can bring to something in the new energy industry. Yeah. And it doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, because that would be, in my mind, a travesty. It would just be...
Waste of time, waste of money.
Yeah.
So... the joy of being the moderator is you get to ask the awkward question that you haven't prepared the panel for as they've been talking. So before I open it up to the floor, just a final question, I suppose, to all the panellists, and you can all look at each other and somebody can go first. But I think the point that's been made around the fact that you need collaboration and those skills all need to come together to make it work. There's no longer one person can do all the job. It's now so multifaceted, you need all these skills to come together. And I think your comments about 5G are absolutely apt. It's all the other skills that are needed. And the fact that digital skills are not as scary as they perhaps were 15, 20 years ago. It's not a big, scary black hole for those who understand it and those who don't, and a clear dividing line. So the question I have is, as both the digital sector and the energy sector have struggled in the past to get that level of diversity and that level of inclusion, and with the offshore renewables in particular having very clear diversity and inclusion targets within the sector deals. How do we use a lot of what you've talked about over the last sort of 35, 40 minutes to actually encourage that diversity in, and where does it start? And I'll leave that open to whoever wants to take that one.
Can I open on that one?
Please, Alison. Somebody has to go first.
Well, if I open, I get the easiest bit because I don't have to think of something new after everybody else has had their bit in there. From my perspective and thinking about developing the talent pipeline and or encouraging people who are currently economically inactive back into work, this is a fabulous opportunity to look at our workplace practices, offer the right support to get women back in, people with caring responsibilities, people who might live further away. We've spoken about the ability to work remotely. I mean, you could be, I'll use Braemar as a thing, you could be living in Braemar and working in Aberdeen. We have a huge workforce pool out there that we can yet tap into. And I think when we recognise that, I'm saying we, I'm not in the oil and gas industry, but when that is recognised, or the energy industry, we have the opportunity to pull in from people who are not currently available for our labour market. And if we have a labour market issue, we really have to be looking wider. I'm limiting it to Scotland at the moment because I like to see Scottish people get into work, but obviously you can go further afield, you can be south of France, you can be Africa, you can be wherever you want. But certainly start looking at people you're not currently looking to recruit. Start thinking about how you'll support them in the workplace with regard to mentoring, training, peer support, offering flexible work conditions as and where you can, and really drive that or push that drive to get in a more diverse workforce. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
No, it's as good as any.
Okay.
Can I give it a go? I'm not going to be as elegant as eloquent as Allison, but maybe just to kind of, again, put it into context, right? Right now, if you take 160,000 people in the industry, 1 in 200 people in the UK either work or supporting the energy industry. Just think about it, massive impact. But we don't necessarily get all the talent because there's another 199 who do not, right, out of 200. We need to make sure we access all the talent all the time and all the capabilities. Innovation tend to come at the interface of disciplines, tend to come from other industries, tend to come from conversations, you have, and then you get the best outcome. So I do think we need to find a way of actually tapping way better in innovation, tapping better in technology, making sure we get a far more inclusive energy industry, far more international industry, where we actually really have diversity of thought, the diversity of kind of backgrounds, diversity of everything coming in a way where we haven't done it before. Now, there are brilliant examples where this works, and I think we need to leverage every bit of it. We are pretty good in the oil and gas industry. I mean, again, these are the most international companies and the most international industries, so a pretty good starting point. There's a lot more to be done. And I remember the common goal is to get to net zero, get a kind of deal with the climate emergency, deal with the affordability crisis, deal with the energy security. My goodness, we can't get better reasons to work, to collaborate together than we currently have. I don't know what else you need to do, how many bigger crises you need to introduce. It's all there. For heaven's sake, can we just do it? Maybe it sounded like a Nike advert, I'm sorry.
So thank you. I don't have an easy answer to the question that you've posed. I think it needs a lot more thought in terms of where are we and where are we going. I think we've made a lot of progress over the last couple of years as a consequence of COVID in terms of some aspects of diversity. So location is far less of a problem than it used to be. There's aspects of neurodiversity which are far more suited to working over teams and people working in an environment that's suitable to them rather than being required to go into an office and dealing with some of the issues that arise there. So I think that helps in terms of some of the diversity and inclusivity aspects that are out there. And I'd be very, very keen that we don't lose that as we start to go back into an environment where there's more and more of a sense of requirements to be in a workplace in order to be seen to be working. I think that would be a terrible step backwards. I think as an industry, though, we still have an awful lot more to do in terms of where we'd like to be in terms of D&I. But I'll leave that to to others to think about exactly how we do that on the broader spectrum there.
So I think one of the areas where we can help to improve the balance within all sectors is looking right back to what happens at early stage within schools, and how we can create an environment whereby anything is possible, not just certain things depending upon who you are and where you are. And I think if we can create that culture within schools, then that will manifest itself as individuals move through education. I think then that we'll start to see the impact and the effect at the end level, at the coalface, if you like, within the workplace. But I think that fundamentally it is about giving children that understanding, that perception that anything is possible. And I think technology enables that, but it's about how we sell it to them. And I think if we continue to sell it in many ways, that, you know, in the traditional ways that we've sold education to children, we'll continue to get the same results, we'll continue to get the same split, and we have to look at that very closely on how we.
Can I interrupt very briefly here, just to make an unashamed plug that when I came in here, Charlie McHardy from DYW, Developing the Young Workforce, is in the audience today. So if anybody here is in an industry that would like to link in with a school in the region, speak to Charlie. Sorry.
So at Scotland Is, one of the things that we do is we have a Critical Friends programme where we take individuals from computer science backgrounds, from industry, and we match them up with teachers so that we can create an environment whereby the teachers understand what's happening out in industry, in the real world. There isn't that disconnect, and that we can hopefully stimulate some excitement within the pupils. We give them an understanding of, well, actually, computer science, it needn't necessarily push me down this individual channel, this route, but actually it opens up doors to lots of other things. And I think that that's one of the ways that will help to improve diversity within the workplace.
I guess I would finish by saying everything that's just been said. And also just the realisation that we have never been in a stronger position to promote diversity in the workplace because of the flexibility to work together. We're no longer limited to people that work in and around your office. You can get people in Braemar or Inverness or Thurso, or people that might not want to have travelled before but are quite willing to work for your company and do it remotely. And for me, that's a huge opportunity that we need to capitalise on, and we as companies need to be as flexible as possible to promote that, and not, dare I say, fall back into the norm that was pre-COVID, where everybody's just coming in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week. There's no need for that anymore. We've proven that successfully over the last 2 years.
No, that's great, thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes left, just under 10 minutes left, so if there are any questions from the audience. Oh, there we go.
Hi, I've got a story that's a question. So, I'm Steve Aiken, thank you, Dan. Steve Aiken from Intelligent Plant. I do some work with the university, and I was chatting to a student about the opportunities for getting placements. And they went to a careers fair, it was at Pittodrie in March. Went to this careers fair and said, hey, where can I get a placement in Aberdeen in data or AI? And the response they got from the careers fair organiser was, oh, there's no jobs in Aberdeen for that. And they left. How do we stop that happening? How do we change that? And that's one of the whole panel. I'm open for options.
I think as a data sector, we have to get out there and tell the story and actually realise and recognise and demonstrate that data is everywhere, and that the opportunities are immense for individuals who are interested in data. And again, I come back to this educating school pupils around what the opportunities are for data, and that you may like geography, but actually if you want to have a job in geography now, you can do that by being data skilled. So it's creating those opportunities, and as a sector we need to get out there and shout about it and entice people in, and that's how we'll get diversity within the sector. If we stick to rigid and traditional structures, then I think we'll continue to get the same kind of responses as you've indicated there. But I think that if we promote the diversity of opportunity as a sector, then we'll entice more people in.
Can I add on to that? And I fully agree with everything you have said. In my previous role, and it wasn't in energy, I was a scientist to trade, I actually ran the placement programme in the School of Medical Sciences at the University of Aberdeen. And one of the problems I had there was in encouraging industry, especially smaller industry, that a graduate student or a placement was a good idea for them. So I think we also have a little bit of education to do amongst the industry itself to show that taking on a student for a placement or a postgraduate place can actually be of benefit to them. It's a two-way thing. And I think that would encourage more placement offers where there are students wanting to take them up. So it's both sides.
Sorry if I can just dip back in there.
Sorry.
I think one of the other things from a data perspective is that organisations don't realise that they are actually data organisations. When you break it down what they're doing, they see the primary sector that they're involved in and they think that's what we are, and they label themselves as that. Whereas actually when you break it down and they are using data and they're creating data and the analytics are coming out, actually the fundamental is they are a data company, but they don't see themselves as that. And maybe by re-looking at it, maybe we then get a better understanding of what different industries do and what different organisations do.
All I can think to your question, Steve, is better marketing. The jobs are there. People are doing these things. That nobody knows that people are doing these things seems to be the challenge. So either we need more jobs and more people talking about that, and that's a part of that's a marketing challenge, part of that's the organisational challenge in terms of using the benefits of things like the 5G hub and other opportunities that we have to develop more local Aberdeen-based companies that are doing these things, so we have those jobs. And then secondly, we need people to talk about them. So we need the hackathons, we need those events that bring people active in these areas together. So we get that community, we get those exciting meetings of mind that happens at those sorts of events to get more activity, more investment, more innovation, and ultimately more jobs in some kind of virtuous circle. That sort of thing would be fabulous.
And I think if I can just break the fourth wall and come in and answer the question as well, I think as a father of children currently making choices on their future career, I think the choices for kids nowadays in terms of the type of education they get have never been wider. And I think the people that they're speaking to in organisations didn't have that. So they don't necessarily understand about the transferability. And arguably, there are some very good guidance teachers and teachers out there who do understand it, and there are some that don't. And I think that education piece goes towards teachers, it goes towards companies who, as Allison said, don't understand the benefit of a graduate placement or a placement student, but likewise don't necessarily understand that someone who's doing a computer science degree can add some real value in a company that doesn't see itself as needing that skill set explicitly. So I think as the conversation evolves, I think you'll see more of that, and hopefully they won't experience that scenario again. I think we've got time for probably one more question before we...
It's Mark Ross here from James Fisher. Just want to start off by saying, Paul, that was a fantastic presentation you did in the panel. It was a very interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it. I dare say everyone in this room with this new transition is going to do quite well. You know, I mean, I've got no doubt about that. My only concern is, historically in this country, we've got a lot of sea, water around the borders, but yet we don't build ships like we used to. We used to build oil rigs. I mean, we don't do that now. So even though there's good opportunities out there, I think within the United Kingdom, we're going to miss the majority of it, and most of it's going to be overseas, as historically we've seen. What's your thoughts on that one?
I think it's a great question. Let me pick it up. So there is hope. Let me start with that one, right? And the reason why there is hope, there is two big arrangements done between industry and government. The first one is the offshore wind sector deal, and the other one is the North Sea transition deal. One is with the oil and gas industry, the other one is the wind industry. And it's very clear in both deals, there is 50-60% local content. Things need to happen in the UK. So there's real driver visibility of actually building UK capability, UK manufacturing capacity to do so. If you have time this afternoon, have a look what was announced by Crown Estate Scotland this morning. This is the ScotWind licenses and particularly the supply chain commitments. 17 kind of consortia have made very clear commitments. What are they committing to build in Scotland, build in the UK and in other places? This is where the rubber hits the road, where it is really clear what is going to happen, what the jobs are, what they're going to commit to, and they will be held accountable for it to do so. So But I think the question is absolutely right. It is shifting. And again, it's having continuously the spotlight on there is actually really important, because this is about activity, and activity at the end is jobs and opportunities here.
Thank you. And I think just to add to that, I think Scotland and the UK won't compete on some of the building material if we do it the way we've always done it. And again, my previous background, I worked in shipyards, and I've been involved in that manufacturing side. But there's nothing to say in it, and it's a nice link into the digital. Automated manufacturing, some of the skills that we will need in the future, which still rely on the core welding skills and the core fabrication skills, but some of the ways that automation will impact, and some of the work that the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland are doing in that space, will really make manufacturing in this country competitive. And that's how we'll win work and do that work and deliver what Paul has alluded to in the sector deal. Not by doing it smarter, and by using the tools that the panel have discussed over the last 50 minutes or so. And utilising those tools so we can be competitive, because we're efficient and we're doing it effectively. So on that note, I'd just like to say thank you to the panel for what was firstly a fascinating discussion, and secondly for making me not speak too much, because they did it all themselves. So that was the joy of being a moderator. We've got about a 10-minute break, so 2:45. The next panel will start with John and powering a diversified energy ecosystem. So there's about a 10-15 minute comfort break just now. But again, thank you very much for the panel for your time.